Welcome to by Design. In this episode we're going to tie Swimtrue Bucktail. But before we get into that, let's have a quick look at this crankbait and get some sort of understanding on how it swims, and maybe use some of that information in relationship to tying and designing swimming flies. So basically, when we pull this crankbait through the water, the front-on force hits the lip, and it's going to force the lure to turn to one side, seeking the path of least resistance. This turning exposes the side of the crankbait to the front-on water pressure. Now, if that exceeds that of the lip, it'll swing the other way. So it'll bleed the pressure off the lip, swing the other way, and this process will repeat if the crankbait's balanced. And that's basically just the relationship between the lip shape and size in relationship to the size and shape of the crankbait. The other things we could probably deduct from crankbait is the towing point and in relationship to the body profile. So if you look at it, most of the body profile is above the towing point, and only the lip and the hooks are below the towing point. And I think that is a key factor in designing flies that swim. We need to keep all the body profile above the hook eye, and at least amount of materials below. So we really want to minimize how much drag we place underneath the hook eye. We need all the materials above that hook eye so they can help fight the forces generated by the lip. So that's pretty basic, and that's pretty much my main rules when I'm designing a fly to swim. I keep all the body profile above the hook eye. Everything that I want to float on the fly will be above the hook eye, and everything that I want to sink will be below the hook eye. So you can see on the Swimtrue Bucktail we've got the bead chain, which is obviously going to sink, and it helps stabilize the fly. So with that information, let's get started on our Swimtrue Bucktail. Firstly, we're going to put a size 1 B10S in the vise. I'm just going to start the thread in the middle of the shank, and with nice tight turns we're just going to put a base layer down, stopping at the hook point and then working our way back to the hook eye, stopping about 1/8 of an inch from the hook eye. At this point we're going to grab a bead chain, and the bead chain for the most part is going to keep our wire lip loop straight, or keep the lip straight if you like. So it's important that we get it 90 degrees to the hook shank, and we can just do a series of crisscross turns, nice and tight, nice and square to the hook shank, also making sure that it's 90 degrees to the hook bend, which is also important to keep the fly tracking nice. At the end I'll show you a few techniques to get the fly tracking properly, and it'll actually even compensate for a little bit of error in that department. But for the time being, let's forge ahead. Our next step, we're going to grab a 3-inch piece or a 75mm piece of 45-pound stainless steel plastic coated wire, and if we just pinch that in the middle, and then with the other hand just grab the ends and lining them up, which forms a nice gradual loop. If we just put that loop on top of the hook shank, catch it in with a few turns, and then with just a few open loose turns, just work your way to the hook point. Before we go any further, we're just going to do a few things. We're just going to make sure that our lip loop is the right size, and just make sure it's in the middle of our hook shank. So you can see there the loop is nice and even in between from the hook eye. You can see that the hook eye is about the middle of that loop. So at this stage, we're going to cut ourselves a piece of 2mm foam, and it's going to be 10mm wide. And we're going to use that to gauge the length of the lip loop. So if we just put it underneath the loop there, so it hits the hook eye, and we can see that it needs to be a little bit bigger. So we're just going to grab the end, tease that loop out so it's a little bit bigger, and line it up again. Okay, that's getting pretty close, just a little bit more. Okay, so that's good enough. That's pretty close. So now we can go ahead and bind that down nice and tight, making sure that the wire is on top of the hook shank. And then just return your thread behind the bead chains. At this point we can get a bit of zapper gap and just put it on top of the hook shank and get those bead chains. So just a little bit on the size of the bead chain. Basically that is, it governs your sink rate for your fly. So the bigger the bead chain, the faster the fly will sink. And I find the best range is to have from negative buoyancy, so it just sits in the water column, to a slow sink. That range, I think you get the best action. If you want to go deeper with your fly, obviously a sinking line is the way to go. So we're going to grab a pinch of bucktail, which is going to form the tail. We're doing this two-tone, so the bottom of the fly we're going to use a white bucktail. So just go through your normal processes with that. Okay, so we've got a pinch of bucktail. The length of the wing, you can vary it from 2 hook shanks to a hook shank and a half. I'm going to go with 2 hook shanks. I just line that up, and we're just going to cut the butt end so we can sit them right behind the bead chain. Make sure we get all the little fibres, or some wall fibres out. Any rogue fibres, remove them. Just place the butt ends right behind the bead chain. Catch them in. Now we want the fibres to sit on top of the hook shank if we can, because the more material we can have above the hook eye or the hook on top of the shank, the better this fly will swim. Bind that down nice and tight. Go back to the middle of the fly. Grab a few strands of flash. Return your thread back behind the bead chain. So you just cut another clump about the same size. Just line it up. So you have the length the same. You make it just slightly longer if you like. Trim that to suit. Again, just catching the butt ends right next to the bead chain, and just hold the tips of the bucktail with slight pressure, so when you wind back towards the hook point, it's going to sit right on top. And then when you're happy with that, bind that down nice and tight. Now take our strip of foam. This piece is 2mm thick by 10mm wide, and it has a slot in the middle of the foam, about 15mm back from one end, and you can see the slot there, and that's going to allow the hook eye to go through the foam. So what we do, we just turn it so it's 90 degrees to the hook bend, poke the eye through the slot in the foam, and then just turn it down so it's in its working position. Pinch the foam around the hook shank and catch it with a few turns of thread. Then we're going to have a look to make sure our lip loop is in the middle of the foam lip. If it's not, we can just readjust a little bit. So the key here is to make sure the lip loop is in the middle of the foam strip, and we can check that by just the gap on either side of the loop. You have the same amount of foam showing. So that's pretty good like that. Now at this stage, because we've got about 2 millimeters either side, what we can do, we can push the lip loop itself so it just makes it a little wider, even a little bit more. Readjust that loop and the foam until we have about 1 millimeter either side of the foam, and that's the ideal spot there. So what we're going to do, we're going to pinch that foam down again, and with open turns we're going to wind back towards the hook point, stopping at the hook point, and then wind back to the bead chain. So now if we flip our fly upside down, I'll just tilt it towards you guys so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to grab my zapper gap, and I'm going to put a bit on the wire loop, get a nice good saturation of zapper gap, and carefully I'm going to place the lip loop back onto the foam and just hold it in position. Push against the foam so it's pushing against the wire loop, so we get that right in the middle of the foam. That stuff dries pretty quickly, so we can go to the next step. Wind our thread back to the hook point, okay, so the underbody. We have a few choices when it comes to the underbody, but what we need to avoid is too much bulk or too much material underneath the hook eye. As we discussed before, we need to keep as much body profile as we can above the hook eye, also keeping the underneath part of the fly with the least amount of drag that we can. So next step, we're going to tie in the underbody, and I'm going to use diamond braid in pearl. Let me just tie that on top of the hook shank there. Wind our thread back to the bead chain. We can add a drop of head cement on the thread there, so we get a good bond. And with touching turns, just wind a diamond braid up the body until we get right to the bead chain. Then grab your tag end and then just wrap it around the thread for a couple of turns. Bring it up and secure it in with a few wraps of thread, and we can just trim our tag end off. Our next step is we're going to grab the tag of the lip and we're going to fold it over the body of the fly. Just catch that in with one turn of thread, and then just fold the foam back on itself. I think grabbing a pair of scissors, and we're going to cut that tag end so it's flush with the back of the body, just like so. Now take your thread off the foam and fold that tag underneath, and then fold it back on itself. Then grab your thread and trap that in with a few turns. At this point, just make sure that the tag end is folded nice and straight, so it's not sticking out anywhere. When you're happy with that, get a couple of nice tight turns on it, then we can just form a 2-finger whip finish, and we're just going to whip finish that off in between the head loop and the lip itself, and just cut your tag off. Okay, so our fly is nearly done. Okay, so it's time to trim our lip. We have two choices. We can tie it like this, where it's got a square end. This gives you a really nice open swimming action. The other option is we can just cut it around the actual loop itself, and we end up with like a teardrop shaped lip. And this lip is good if we're going to fish in streams or fast water where the fly is going to go a lot faster than you normally would strip it. That shape seems to handle a little bit more speed. But regardless of what shape we cut the lip, we have a few options to reduce that front-on force that we talked about before, and we're going to do that in the next step. But for now, I'm going to trim this fly so it's got a square lip. So let's just go ahead and cut the end off, trying to get it about at 90 degrees, like that. And our next step, regardless of whether we follow the wire or not, we're going to cut either side of the fly where the lip loop goes into the bead chain. And I'll just do that now, just to show you what I mean. So I've put two cuts following that wire into the bead chain. And now we're just going to snip that out on each side. So we got something that looks like that. Just try and keep the shoulders even if you can. If they're a little bit out, it's not going to matter too much. So let's go ahead and put our fly back in the vise. Now we're going to reinforce this lip with using some silicone type glue. You can use like a soft text. I'm going to use goop. I'm just going to get my little artist trowel like this. You can use a piece of plastic or even a popsicle stick or something like that. So all you're going to do, you're going to put a little blob on the end of your trowel or whatever you decide to use, and we're just going to put that on the underside, and we're going to just coat a nice even layer on top of that foam, sandwiching your lip loop and the actual foam lip together. And when that dries, I'll show you how we can bend that loop, not only to fix the tracking to get the fly to swim a lot straighter, but we can also change the action, and I'll show you that as soon as it dries. So now the lip's nice and dry. Let's have a look at it. Let's go over a few ideas and tips on how to get this fly to swim nice and true. The first thing we can do is we can just squeeze that together, and straight away you can see now the lip has a nice concave surface area. The other thing we need to do is bend it down to about a 45-degree angle. You'll find that most crankbaits use about 45 degrees, so we can easily bend that. We can bend that more, or we can bend that less, depending on how the fly is working. So you can change the action by changing the angle. The other thing we can do, when you tie this onto your line, obviously you're going to use a loop knot, and what really helps too is a micro barrel swivel will really help you a couple of feet up the line, just to not only take the twists out of the fly line, it'll just make the fly swim a lot better, just without adding that little swivel. So just to go over a few tips as far as fishing the fly and getting it to track right, to swim straight. After you've tied a loop knot on, you've thrown your fly in the water, and you strip it, and you notice it's lifting up to one side. What you want to do is grab your lip and just twist it in the direction it's lifting. So if it lifts this way, just get your lip and twist it in that direction. If it lifts back the other way, just give it a slight twist in that direction. If you want the fly to go a lot faster, just reduce the surface area of the lip by squeezing it in. And the reverse is possible. If you want to get more of an open swim at a slow speed, you just have to open that lip up again. So you've got that option to change what retrieval speed you want to do at the time. That's pretty much it. Just remember the loop knot and the barrel swivel will help. Apart from that, you can tie this on a few other hooks. This is a Gamakatsu S15, I think it is. Also, you can experiment with the underbody. This one's using a sparkle brush, so it's a very fine dubbing that they use for that, which is perfect. You can also tie in a dubbing loop and dub in some ice dubbing as well, which works pretty good. As long as you keep it nice and sparse, it shouldn't affect the fly too much. Okay, well that's the Swimtrue Bucktail. I hope you enjoyed that. Till next time, take care and cheers.